Well, I seem to have kicked a hornet's nest. It's the Wilk Report. I'm Michael Wilk, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio, and back with me is Larry Bernard. We're going to discuss the reaction to my last video, because it actually got a significant number of views, considering my channel is as small as it is. But a number of the comments there, and it's a pretty even, more or less even mix between people who kind of agree with me on what I was saying, and the rabid Snyder fans who were all getting up in my face or trying to, because they didn't want to admit that they were so rabid about this thing. It's like, I don't know if you watched my video, Larry, but I have to admit, I had to get myself several energy drinks and take a few naps to try and get through it, because it was just so long. It's like, the only other movie I've seen that dragged on for so long was River of Grass, and that was 76 minutes, felt like 3 hours. This one is 4 hours and felt like 6. So, oh my god.
So I mean, let's get to brass tacks. There was a 2.5-hour Zack Snyder version of this movie in that 4 hours and some change. Zack doesn't know how to pace things. He doesn't understand that sometimes brevity is the soul of wit. He drags things out. He doesn't need to. So you could have cut a lot of fat out of this movie. You could have easily gotten this whole thing done in 3 hours, and it would have been better.
Yeah, and what really amazes me is, like, Larry, you're old enough to probably remember when Superman the movie was released on television on ABC back in the 80s. For people who aren't familiar with that, so, in 1978, Richard Donner directed Superman the movie, a screenplay written by Mario Puzo of The Godfather fame. Really epic version of Superman on the big screen. I mean, there had been the Republic serial, and of course George Reeves had his TV show in the 50s, but really 1978, after the success of Star Wars, really there was an effort to kind of bring to the screen a lot of stuff that otherwise would not have gotten made. And so Richard Donner was able to get together this mixture of young talent. I think Christopher Reeve was 25 at the time, and then of course more established actors like Marlon Brando and Glenn Ford and Jackie Cooper, who was a former Little Rascal. So you had this nice mix of older actors and younger actors, and of course Gene Hackman and Ned Beatty as Lex Luthor and his bubbling sidekick Otis. So it was a huge hit. It led to sequels. Richard Donner was actually filming 2 films back to back. He got removed part of the way through Superman 2 and replaced with Richard Lester. That's a whole topic all to itself, but there are kind of some parallels between that effort and the Snyder version of Justice League, where Donner was able to get his vision of what Superman 2 should have been, and actually was very close to the TV cut that I saw. But there was this, like, it ended up being like a 3-hour long TV edit of Superman the movie that just pretty much threw in just about everything that was cut out of the theatrical release to shorten the runtime. And a lot of the scenes, especially the scenes with Lex Luthor and Otis, played by Ned Beatty, basically behaving like Laurel and Hardy, where Ned Beatty's playing Stan Laurel and Lex Luthor as Oliver Hardy. A lot of it I felt was unnecessarily, and added some really unneeded comedy to that, because you wonder how this guy can be such a threat, when he's got such an incompetent assistant who's constantly sabotaging his plans. So, it does have its problems, but even still, those added scenes move the story along and kind of develop the plot with the nuclear missiles. Whereas, with all the stuff that Snyder puts into his movie, it doesn't advance the plot. It doesn't really add anything new to the existing narrative. So a lot of this just...
you covered what was actually added in the Snyder Cut.
Yeah.
What was added was there was actual heart and plot and pathos for Cyborg, which I think is a large part of why Ray Fisher is so very, very angry at Warner Media right now.
Yeah, I think that's part
Because
of it, but at the same time, it's like a lot of that stuff with Cyborg really should have been set up for a standalone movie, and again, added really nothing to the Justice League movie because uh,
that's another thing I
yeah,
want to get to from my own interpretation of watching the Snyder Cut, because both what was done for Flash in that movie and what was done for Cyborg, where do you go with a Flash or Cyborg movie?
exactly. So I mean,
There's no meat left on the bone for the next guy.
yeah, my point exactly. It's like I mean, because and really a lot of the and Joss Whedon being a trash human being aside, you really can't blame him for why the theatrical release was as awful as it was because it was pretty clear that the studio kind of took over the production after Zack Snyder stepped down because his daughter committed suicide and uh,
Well,
there was
that's
just
one version of the story. There's another version. He was fired, and then the daughter committed suicide, and then they allowed him to resign because
yeah
of that to
yeah I remember
make
that
up for everything.
yeah but it seemed pretty clear though that whatever the case with his daughter, Warner Brothers didn't want him at the helm because Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman were pretty underwhelming at the box office relative to the budget. Because a lot of
Mm.
people, in fact, I remember getting into it with someone on a previous movie having to do with Batman versus Superman, where it was basically a movie that cost, when you had the total budget, probably cost somewhere in the ballpark of between 600 and 700 million dollars, probably closer to 700 million.
Mm.
And with an $850 million box office gross, I mean, yeah, it made its money back, but in order to be considered successful, it needed to make over $1 billion, and it didn't clear that mark. So, I mean, investors don't really want to be told, yeah, you'll make your money back and maybe a little bit of profit on the side. No, they want to know that they're going to make a healthy return on investment.
But let's kind of get to some real brass tacks here. This wasn't all what was originally on the table when Zach left the movie. Some stuff was clearly added as part of a slick marketing campaign to try to build audience anticipation for a nightmare timeline movie, which, based on that little terrible scene with Jared Leto, just really sounds awful.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to tack into Injustice Gods Among Us, which started as a video game and then went into a seemingly endless series of graphic novels
Hmm.
or trade paperbacks. I keep getting those two confused. It's been a while since I was in the comics industry myself because I was once. For people who don't know, I spent a couple of months as part owner of a comic book store that I was trying to save from going under because the owner discovered he'd bitten off more than he could chew, and I wanted to kind of keep it open because I wanted something that was within the neighborhood and within walking distance of where I lived. But unfortunately, that didn't last. So,
Yeah.
but after that,
Now,
yeah,
there's also the scene with Martian Manhunter that was added at the end,
yeah, which
which was
again, added nothing to the story. I mean, why does he impersonate Martha Kent? There was no narrative need for that.
well. I was talking specifically the weird dream sequence and Ben Affleck waking up and Martian Manhunter showing up and saying, I want to tell you about the Justice League initiative. That was something that was clearly added after the whole ethos and idea of the Snyder Cut came into being.
Yeah,
So this wasn't all his original vision. And the scene with Martha Kent in the apartment was kind of better. So if the Martian Manhunter scene was always his intended vision for part of there, so he basically wrote the entire emotional through line of that, which is why Joss Whedon redid that in the Daily Planet.
yeah. Well, it seemed to me like, I mean, in my opinion, throwing Martian Manhunter in there and not really giving him anything to do was a mistake because you're just throwing the character in just to have him in there, and
But it's worse
again,
than that.
there really is no narrative sense for having him impersonate Martha Kent just to get Lois Lane to go visit Superman's grave because there was already motivation enough, and
You
just
mean how she was already going out there and giving coffee to the police who were there?
yeah,
Yeah, so Zack Snyder doesn't understand how people work, and his stories aren't interested in people.
Wait,
They're interested in larger than life figures.
you mean a guy who makes a movie where a woman gets raped and dissociates herself by pretending she's actually into it? Indicates that the director doesn't understand people.
Yeah, no, he doesn't understand how human emotions work, both within the reality of his fiction and in the reality of how an audience will take his fiction. Like, a lot of people are critical of Sucker Punch because it's all sizzle, no steak. There's all sorts of very pretty CGI sequences, but what's underneath all of that is just rotten and awful
Yeah, I mean,
and doesn't make any sense.
right, and I kept getting the feeling when I was watching the Snyder version of Justice League that I kept having deja vu to both the 300 and Watchmen extended edition because both were just overproduced. Very little substance to it, just stuff added that just never needed to be there, and I was forced to watch the 300 for a class on Greek history as a demonstration of why Hollywood is shit at telling an accurate portrayal of history.
But Frank Miller wasn't trying to do an accurate historical portrayal.
No, he wasn't.
He was trying to do the 50s, movie serial retelling of the Battle of Thermopylae.
Right. Right. And Snyder, for whatever reason, his adaptation of it just took it. I mean, it's like there's stuff that Snyder takes literally that should never be taken literally because a lot of the times it serves as allegory. And, in terms of like, translating from a comic book to a motion picture, some things will translate well. I mean, take a look at Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I think he should have started with The Hobbit and then gone to Lord of the Rings, but he started with the trilogy, and a lot of people, and myself included, were kind of annoyed at the changes made from the novels, and also a lot of things that were cut out, like for example Tom Bombadil, that whole thing, because he's the one who saves him from the Barrow Wights. But I also understood though that a film like the Lord of the Rings, you just cannot translate it page for page to the big screen because for one thing, the movie runtime, you just would never be able to make it work. And there are some things in the book that just don't make sense when you present it to screen. For example, in the book, it's actually Aragorn who has misgivings about going into Moria, and Gandalf who insists on taking a shortcut through there. But in the film, Gandalf being he's a Maya, an angelic being, so he's a wizard too, so he would probably know or suspect that there's a Balrog still lurking somewhere down there.
Yeah,
because everyone,
another one is
everyone who's versed in lore would have heard of Durin's Bane, and no one really. So it kind of makes sense to change that within the context of the film, because if you kept it as is, you'd wonder, Gandalf seems kind of dim to make such a boneheaded maneuver, especially for someone who's been around for thousands of years. So,
well, I mean, it's because he's smoking the Hobbit's weed.
Yeah, well, pipe weed is tobacco. Okay, that's.
I mean, if you look at the hobbits and how much they eat, I'm not sure it's tobacco. I mean, I'm really not sure it's tobacco. But the Snyder Cut gave me a deeper appreciation for Joss Whedon. There's several decisions he made that make more sense. Basically, every place I view what Joss Whedon added to that movie as a failure is when he was saying we need Marvel jokes in there.
Yeah, and to the extent that, and fortunately, it's been a number of years since I saw the theatrical release, so my mind has blocked out much of the trauma that it suffered having to sit through that. But yeah, I mean, the jokes were pretty excessive, but Whedon basically took a shit sandwich and added some lettuce and tomato there. It's still a shit sandwich, but it might taste a little bit better for having some greens and fruits in there. But it's still pretty bad. But it just kind of stands as testimony to Whedon's ability as a director. I mean, as a human being, he sucks. I mean, let's not beat around the bush.
Yeah.
I mean, the allegations made by Ray Fisher and I think Gal Gadot now really smack of like craven opportunism, because a lot of the criticisms In fact, someone posted on the Midnight's Edge Facebook group, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been another one. Uh, but some of the things that Fisher was complaining about are things that Whedon allegedly telling him, hell, I wouldn't let Downey, dictate what should go into the Avengers. Why would I let you dictate, what your lines would be? You're the actor. And you're not
there's
Robert Downey
also
Jr., so, I mean, screw you. I mean, I can
there's
understand
also
that.
a space for a little bit of collaboration, but we don't know whether it was a little bit here, a little bit there, or if Ray wanted to completely rework entire pages.
Yeah, and Jeremy Irons apparently, allegedly, was so dissatisfied with the dialogue that he rewrote his lines, which I don't imagine he was able to get away with. Because honestly, I mean, I kind of got the feeling that Zack Snyder is the type of director who is so obsessed with injecting his own ideology and taking everything, making it gritty and dark and pessimistic and on a level rather nihilistic, because I mean, and it kind of permeates all of his work. I mean, if you look at Batman versus no, I think it was either Man of Steel with the Kryptonian criminals,
Mm.
the guy from Law and Order, and I'm John Delaney, I think his name is.
Filoni,
Uh,
Christopher Filoni, I
Christopher
think.
Filoni. Okay, yeah, he was from Law and Order SVU, and he was like, kind of throws the woman Kryptonian's words back at her. It's like all that matters is a good death, and that's kind of like the attitude that permeates all of Zack Snyder's work. I mean, it was in 300, it was in Watchmen, it was in the Dawn of the Dead reboot to an extent, and it's like when you approach that thing, I mean, if it fits the story that you're trying to tell, that's one thing. But you're trying to apply that to Superman, and it doesn't work.
But let's back all the way out of here, because the bones of the script that existed in both movies, because the story is nearly identical for both movies, is Steppenwolf comes to Earth to find the MacGuffin. The only difference in the Zack Snyder version is he comes to find the MacGuffin, and then he finds that there's another MacGuffin that's there, even though the MacGuffin he came to look for was on the place where Darkseid found the other MacGuffin, but apparently everybody else who knew about that other MacGuffin who was there with Darkseid all died. I mean, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and basic storytelling 101. You really don't want to have more than one more MacGuffins than you really need, because I mean, think
Well,
about it. I mean, Shazam,
well,
which in my mind was a far better film than this will ever be. It only had one MacGuffin, this stone that holds like all the seven
yeah,
demons.
yeah. That's all
Representing
it
the slightly
needed.
different set. Right. You only needed that one, and of course, the bad guy is after it, and Shazam is the only thing standing in his way, even though he's
Yeah.
technically a kid who doesn't even realize the extent of his own powers. But you know
But
that was all they needed.
but the thing that really bothers me is this shows the lack of care to the broader DCEU narrative, because if anybody knew about Darkseid, and I'm sure Zack Snyder is more knowledgeable about Darkseid than this script allots for, because Darkseid is the edgier version of Thanos.
Yeah,
The
which
anti-life equation is on Earth. That's what needed to be your Infinity Gauntlet scenario as a thread for all the movies.
right, and it came off like a cheap knockoff of the Avengers saga, which again, I understand Warner wants to play catch up, and it doesn't want to invest a decade and a half that led up to the Avengers Endgame. But this is why you don't want to kind of rush through things, because you're it's obvious that it's a cheap knockoff. And
Yeah,
what really gets me is that the head in Shazam and Joker. I mean, Joker was its own thing. I mean, it's not really related to the larger DCEU. But with Shazam, there's that tie-in towards the end of the movie where you've got a stand-in for uh, Superman, Henry Cavill, because
yeah,
he couldn't make it for that. He was unavailable for that scene. But originally conceived that was meant to show a link between Cable's Superman and Shazam.
Which would have been an excellent follow-up movie.
Right.
Unfortunately, Henry Cable's not going to get to do that.
Yeah, and
which is really a shame. I didn't appreciate him as an actor until I watched him in the Witcher series, and then I really was like going, man, if only he had a competent Superman story to be in.
Yeah, I mean, turning him into this angst-ridden, kind of dumbass who basically, does loads of property damage with little thought to the consequences.
Well, how about his brutally torturing Steppenwolf and maiming him in the movie?
Yeah, it's like, no, this is, I mean, I'll put it to you this way. Superman 3, okay, now, and this is where, the series from the 80s really went off the rails, okay? But Richard Lester, when he directed Superman 3, all right, he turned Superman dark, but there was an actual narrative reason for why he went dark. He was exposed to a bad copy of kryptonite that the bad guys had constructed based on an incomplete scan of real kryptonite, and instead of killing him like it was intended, it turned him dark. And then we get this like junkyard fight scene between Dark Superman and his Clark Kent alter ego, and who eventually wins out and restores himself. But this is the sort of storytelling, and there's a nod to the Superman 2 closing fight scene where there's a similar dynamic going on. It's like it's less a physical fight than it is one in the mind of the people taking part in it. Like the Fortress of Solitude fight in Superman 2, Superman is on his home turf. He knows he's no match for the three supervillains in terms of brawn because he's outnumbered. But he's on his home turf. He's got greater experience with his powers, not all of which are physical. So a lot of them are mental. He's able to create illusions, making himself appear in more than one place at one time. And even though it was really badly executed, but that bit with the S shield and ensnaring Nog, was meant to imply that, this is largely a battle of illusion and mental tricks.
Yeah, that was not well executed, but it was better. Yeah. And I think fundamentally the problem is it was a quest for a MacGuffin, and we didn't get to the MacGuffin until halfway through the movie.
Right, and all the exposition. It's like, dude, I mean, my screen, no. and granted, the criticisms that people were leveling at me, it's like, how many movies have you made? It's like, well, it doesn't matter. I still went to film school and took screenwriting, and that my screenwriting professor has actually gotten his screenplays made into feature films. That did reasonably well, so it's not like, I was taught by people who had no idea what they were talking about or who had no real world Hollywood experience. No, my screenwriting professor was the guy who drove the point home, show, don't tell.
But the problems in Zack Snyder and the theatrical release are both come from the problems that come from the end of Batman v Superman. And for example, they wanted to do the death of Superman angle, but they didn't want to do the payoff.
Right.
And to do a little segue for a moment, Wrestlemania. You probably didn't watch Wrestlemania. Are you at least familiar with what happened in Wrestlemania?
Which one?
It was the Edge match in Wrestlemania.
Oh, God. By that point, I'd actually stopped watching WWE.
No. This was this year. This was this year's WrestleMania. So you have Edge, you have Roman Reigns, both in a match, both feuding for the title. Edge, who left the WWE, had a legitimate injury. This isn't like what happened with Daniel Bryan, who I'm going to get to in a minute, who had an injury that was bad, but not as bad enough to actually make him retire. But the WWE's lawyers were like, going, we don't want to take the risk, especially because there are several people trying to get us on concussion-related issues.
Yeah, and Edge is actually about my age, actually. I think he might be a few months younger than I am, but one of the reasons why he decided to turn heel back in the mid-2000s was, by that point in his career, he wasn't really getting anywhere as a face. So, I guess he and the WWE writers decided to take him in a heel direction. But he was having health issues even back then with his back injuries. So,
but he was able to get healthy enough to go in. They put him in a program with Roman Reigns, who's a struggling performer, not popular with the fans, but popular with management. And Roman had to leave briefly over cancer-related issues. He's regained the title. So the story is Edge fought his way to get back, to get healthy enough. He's in the ring for one more chance at the title. And you got Roman Reigns, the new face of the franchise, who cancer nearly took out, who has to stand in his way. And then they put Daniel Bryan in there. And when you do that, you ruin the storytelling of those two people.
Yeah.
And you muddle the storytelling of the match. And while Daniel Bryan has a similar story, by putting that in there, you overly complicate the basic story. So the basic story of this is there's a problem so big that you need to have all the DC characters mashed into the toy box to fight the problem. That's
Right.
your story.
Yeah.
So you have to, number one, establish the threat. Number two, get the team together. The team has a setback. They then come together, have a moment of truth in the darkest hour, come together, then they rally and fight the problem.
Right. And instead what we got was, oh, this guy's too powerful for us to beat on our, as a team, so we have to resurrect Superman and just have him do all the heavy hitting for us since we're not up to the task. And if you think about it, that's so bloody freaking stupid, because a bad guy, when you're doing an ensemble movie like this for superheroes, the threat should be big enough that no single member of the team, like say whether it's Avengers or Justice League, no single member, not even Superman, should be able to handle the threat on his or her own. And that's why you have the team come together in the first place, because, by themselves, they can't do much. Together, yeah. But once they resurrect Superman, it's pretty much like everyone else becomes redundant. And then, it's basically Superman in the Snyder version who ends up defeating the bad guy just by punching him to death or maiming him.
Well, now, in fairness, it's Wonder Woman, because Wonder Woman actually kills him.
Right.
Because that's the way the rules work for Snyder.
Right. Yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot. It's so easy to forget, because it's like half the time I'm nodding off in the middle of the movie and I can't remember who killed whom.
The weird yodeling Greek music where she came up with her
and it
sword
comes out
and
every time they have her on screen too. It's like, oh my god! It's like, talk about overkill.
The music decisions are another problem the movie has, but at a fundamental level, it doesn't have any structure that works. It has something that imitates structure. It's Batman's getting the team together to fight a problem. Oh, look, here's the problem. Batman's getting the team together, and he's getting the team together to fight that problem because he read the script. And then the problem causes Wonder Woman to get to Batman, to give Batman the information he needs to know to fight the problem that he was already getting a team together to fight.
Exactly.
Because he read the script. And then they're like, oh, golly gee willikers, we're not tough enough to solve this problem without Superman, so we're going to do some necromancy. And also at no point in time do the characters say, hey, wait a minute, isn't that how Doomsday was created? How do we not do that?
Yeah. It's like,
that would have been an interesting bit of, dialogue of the characters saying, wait a minute, we saw the consequences of the last time something like this happened. It didn't go well.
Right. And like I said, as garbage as Whedon is as a human being, I mean, you can at least understand why he reshot the stuff he did. I mean, you've got Superman is actually humanized somewhat in the theatrical release, whereas here he's the same. That there's been no character growth, no nothing from the previous two movies, and that's another gripe I have with Snyder, is that there's no growth in the characters at all, because the protagonists are already godlike and perfect. So there's no, I mean, and this is the same problem I had with Captain Marvel, where it's like if your character's already perfect and all powerful, well then why should I invest in the character? Why should I root for her? Because I already know how, I mean, I don't think at any moment that the character is in any real danger, and between being unlikable In fact, there was a scene cut out of Captain Marvel where she actually crushes a guy's hand and steals his bike and his clothes.
And that was cut because the people who were editing the movie realized that that was psychotic.
Right, exactly. And it makes her even less sympathetic. So I don't know why Snyder thought that this was a good idea to make his concepts masquerading his characters like that. I mean, Wonder Woman is basically just kind of hanging around, working in a museum in the theatrical release, and you wonder what she's been up to in the interim. But in the Snyder version, she brutally murders, these, terrorists.
But you know what? That's
and then the girl,
character.
and then there's this girl that says, "Can I be just like you when I grow up?" And it's like, girl, you can be anything you want. It's like, okay, now if I'm a kid and I just want someone to be.
Is that consistent with her character for Wonder Woman 1984, who rapes a guy and then tells people that everything that's terrible and all that, and you have to accept it because that's the truth? I mean, that sounds like somebody who just brutally murdered terrorists in front of children.
Right, but you would think that the natural reaction of a child to seeing someone, even someone who traumatized you, but seeing someone be brutally murdered in front of you. I mean, granted, it's been a while since I was a kid myself, but I don't think I would do anything other than shit my pants and scream at the lady who's like, yeah, I might have saved my life, but, I'm not so sure that she's someone I would trust with my life to begin with, because she might end it.
So we're both men of a certain age, and I'm going to age us both by putting in a reference here. So when you watched Red Dawn when you were young and when it was actually in theaters, and communists dropped into the town in Colorado and they were shooting people, they were shooting the teachers, there was a visceral reaction, not a visceral reaction of, I want communists to come in and shoot my teachers, but a visceral reaction of this cool cinematic experience that's touching on something that is actually emotionally resonant. And yes, those characters also didn't have a normal reaction, although you can argue about how people would handle an invasion, but you can have a cool reaction to it in a piece of fiction. But if you need anything naturalistic in the fiction, that's not how that works. Like, for example, I don't know if you've watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
I've not been subscribed to Disney Plus. I downloaded Mandalorian, Sail the High Seas, but I've not been tempted to see Falcon and Winter Soldier at all. I guess.
So there's a sequence in the movie where Bucky and Sam are having a conversation about the complicated legacy of Captain America's shield. And while there's reasons in the story that make sense, it doesn't make naturalistic sense because that shield is Steve.
Right.
Steve doesn't have a complicated legacy. He may have done complicated things, but he was a very ish, very uncomplicated person.
Right. In fact,
that's not a natural conversation they would have. So that's the writer saying, "Hey, look, we're making an allegorical reference to something topical."
Right, and actually, I mean, it's actually comic book accurate what he does with the show, because I am a little bit familiar with the controversy over the decapitation with the shield, but Cap actually did that to a vampire. Just took his shield and just
blood.
Yeah, and they showed the blood in there, even if only in silhouette, but it was still it was a lot more brutal in the comic book than it was on the television.
But that's what I was pointing to, though, is that there are things that when you put them in there, you have to think, okay, these are two real people that exist within this fictional world we've created. Is this how they would talk about the shield that's connected to their friend that they both had a very strong connection to, who's dead?
Right.
No, that's not how they would talk. It doesn't matter that they both became aware of the situation with Isaiah Bradley, which I hate from comics, and I think it was a bad idea. And unfortunately, it's a bad idea that people like because it embraces the contemporary politics. But, there's not a lot of good writing in Captain America from a comic book perspective because it has a lot of goofy ideas in it. And the reason Captain America is as popular as he is in the movies is because of the performance of Chris Evans.
Right.
And because of the excellent 3 movies Chris Evans had for Captain America as a character.
Right.
And then the very excellent movie Joss Whedon did with the first Avengers movie.
Right, and keep in mind, when the Marvel Cinematic Universe first began. All right, I think that was what 2006 to 2007 ish, or maybe 2008. I remember, yeah, I think it was maybe 2007. But the Hulk I think was like in 2009, and then you had like Iron Man in 2008. But at the time, these were standalone movies with niche characters, and and you have these little post-credit sequences, teasing, the Avengers get together. So, that brought in the fanboys and the fangirls, let's face it, because there are fangirls who like Marvel Comics too. But that kind of like teased a larger arc that you were looking forward to, while at the same time you were getting like these standalone movies featuring the individual Avengers. And yeah, you can argue that they were kind of formulaic and, a bit more shallow than they should have been. I mean, Black Panther, for example, got, it was a great movie. I liked it, but it did seem that they were so obsessed with getting the big action sequences and the car chase scene and all that stuff that it kind of like made the actual story take a back seat to all that. And I felt, if you just concentrated on the story itself, like the actual character arc between T'Challa and his half brother.
Well, that was his cousin.
Or cousin, I'm sorry, his half cousin. It just becomes this thing where it's like, you're making that take a back seat to all the action sequences, and then, what could have been a really great movie, ended up suffering because you're trying to tease a sequel that, now might not happen.
But that movie is only as good as it was because of the high quality performances done by Chadwick Boseman and Michael B. Jordan.
Yeah, and Michael B. Jordan, I don't know if you remember this, but his uniform was patterned after Vegeta on Dragon Ball Z, and he's a huge anime fan. But we are kind of getting off the rails here.
Yeah.
So I want to try and bring it back down to earth here by going into some of the articles about some of the Snyder trolls who are very vocal and kind of making this happen in the first place. Well, at least they're being either given credit or being blamed for making the Snyder version happen, depending on whom you ask. But I posted my review and I figured, okay, I'll probably get maybe a couple hundred views, and that'll be it. And because I don't have, I have to have a day job because my channel is not big enough to sustain me to do it full time. So I figure, okay, I'll do the video, and then when something comes up that I feel is worthy of reviewing or reporting on, then I'll go ahead and do that. Well, it turns out that a lot of the Snyder fans decided, oh, we're going to flock over from the Midnight's Edge group on Facebook to attack this guy because we think he's a loser. And it's like, and I'm watching this and kind of laughing because it's obvious these people really don't even know why they like the Snyder Cut. They just know that they hate Joss Whedon with a passion for reasons that they don't even articulate well, because they seem more angry about Superman being humanized and that there were too many jokes in the theatrical release, which yeah, there were, but is that the only reason why you didn't like it? And is not quite as bad, really a reason for calling it a masterpiece. At one, they actually call it literally the greatest movie of all time, and it's like, no, that actually would be Gone with the Wind, because if you look at the inflation-adjusted box office gross for that one is still the top moneymaker at over $3 billion. So, but yeah, so let me go ahead and read from the article. Have you had a chance to read these?
I skimmed through them.
All right, yeah. So, all right. So this first one is from the Independent.uk. Warner Brothers boss condemns reprehensible and unacceptable behavior of some Snyder Cut fans. Studio executives were reportedly sent death threats for standing in the way of the remake's release, and I'll get into why there was a lot of hesitancy to do this in the first place, but. Let me just go ahead and read a little bit from the article. It says, Warner Media's CEO has criticized the, quote, reprehensible, end quote, behavior shown by some fans of Zack Snyder's Justice League. The 4-hour remake of 2017's Justice League was released last week. Of course, this was back in March 24th when this dropped. So it was following a lengthy fan-led campaign calling for Zack Snyder to release his original vision for the movie. Snyder stepped away from the directorial duties midway through production due to personal reasons, with Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Joss Whedon taking the reins. The long-running online campaign to release the Snyder Cut ran into controversy after it was reported that film critics and some Warner Brothers executives had received death threats for expressing disinterest in Snyder's version of Justice League or standing in the way of its production. Warner Media's CEO Ann Sarnoff condemned the actions of those fans during a recent interview with Variety. We're not tolerating any of that, she said. That behavior is reprehensible no matter what franchise you're talking about or what business you're talking about. It's completely unacceptable. Sarnoff added that she is very disappointed in the fans who chose to go to that negative place with regard to DC, with regard to some of our executives. We want DC Comics to be a fandom that feels safe and inclusive. We want people to be able to speak up for the things they love, but we don't want it to be a culture of canceling things that any small faction isn't happy with, she said. We're not about that. We're about positivity and celebration.
Well, I mean, sure, if you want to lie.
Yeah.
Let's be real.
Yeah, lie through their teeth.
This got made because of COVID and because of HBO Plus.
Right. And
they did content on HBO Plus and $80 million to do some reshoots and to do some finishing up on some special effects shots.
Yeah, and honestly,
and Snyder
the
waiving
rework special
his costs.
Effects, yeah, and honestly, the rework special effects still look like trash, in my opinion. I mean, it's like overuse of CGI, and that looks way too cartoony. I mean, we have the same problem with the 300, with Watchmen. I mean, it's just...
So there were three major movies that have been released so far, with a primary release birth on HBO Plus. Number one was Wonder Woman 1984 because it was the first one. So everybody jumped in on that. Unfortunately, Wonder Woman 1984 is terrible.
Yeah, and for reasons that have nothing to do with what a lot of people are criticizing it for. I mean,
the rape scene is a big one.
Yeah, that's the biggest one. I mean, because... All right, so last time I was in college for my master's degree, I was taking history, and this was in particular colonial history, American colonial history, and a student went ahead and was trying to bring up this notion about how some slaves entered into consensual relationships with their masters, and my professor pretty much shut him down because he was like, no, it was rape. She could not say no.
But the problem with this rape that makes it, because it's magic, that makes it worse is it was unnecessary for the plot. You could have gotten Steve Trevor back in a way that didn't involve some guy being raped.
Right.
And it's like, we're doing it because someone
cannot give consent.
Trope.
Right. Anytime someone cannot give informed consent, it's rape. Because if that, for example, if you're deceiving someone into having sex with you who otherwise wouldn't, I mean, would that person have given consent knowing, that you were lying?
Yeah.
Or in this case, Steve Trevor is brought back in the body of a total stranger who has nothing to do with any of what's going on, and, she sleeps with him, or it's implied that she sleeps with him. It's like, he never gave his consent.
Yeah. And then she later ends up dating him at the end of the movie.
Right. So, I mean...
Which is really weird and inappropriate.
Right.
The second big movie that they got was Godzilla vs. Kong.
Right, which also got a theatrical release as well, and that has done pretty well. I mean, so Warner Brothers is now rethinking its early decision to lump all of its stuff onto HBO Max. Now it's thinking, you know what? Yeah, let's go back to theaters as well as streaming, because, the people who can't leave home because of COVID can watch it at home, and the people who can... or who just don't give a shit, they'll go watch it on the big screen. And the numbers so far really indicate that theaters are not out yet.
There are certain movies that people will go to a theater to see. And then there are other movies that, in our current climate, it really makes more sense to stream them. Like Nobody, for example. Nobody's an excellent movie with Bob Odenkirk in it. It's an excellent movie. But realistically, if I wasn't super into going to the movie theaters, I would have rather streamed it.
Yeah. Yeah, although and like I said, with a big spectacle movie like Godzilla versus King Kong, yeah, you just know that's got to get a theatrical release, and I think that's going to be true for most blockbusters. Now,
Yeah.
Tenet, I think probably would have done better at the box office if the studio
It
had
was
decided.
released later.
Right. Well, that and also if they had released to drive-in movie theater screens, much more of those, because from what I read, the actual contract stipulated that it cannot play on a drive-in movie screen if there's no indoor theater playing,
That's
which
weird.
is stupid because it's like you're limiting your audience because, hello, COVID still a thing. Has
But
anyone forgotten? So I mean, you know, people can go to a drive-in movie theater, stay relatively safe within their own cars, not have to leave except maybe to get concessions, but you can, feasibly have people bring their own, and make exceptions.
but the
If they pay an
numbers
extra fee for, to get past the ticket counter. But you could have that scenario and therefore get more people to actually see it. But instead, they limited the number of screens that it was playing on, and let's face it, the movie is pretty incomprehensible to begin with. So,
yeah.
uh, so I
But
mean,
the Snyder Cut did half to a third of the business on HBO Max, assuming because all these different sites that claim to actually be able to know what the streaming services numbers are. I put all of those with a grain of salt, but most of them are saying it did somewhere between a third to half of the business that Godzilla vs. Kong did on HBO
right,
Max.
and so the notion that Snyder's movies are going to keep being made and churned out, and this is what really people need to understand is no studio in its
Snyder
right
has a deal with
mind.
Netflix.
No studio in its right mind is going to keep investing in a director whose movies cost so much and bring in so little in return relative to the total cost of the movie itself. I mean, like I said, Batman versus Superman did make its money back. It made a profit, but it was kind of a mediocre profit. So it's like I said, no one's going to want to say in a pitch meeting, uh, you know, that you'll make your money back and maybe a little bit more. No, investors want to be told, yeah, you're going to make a ton of money from this.
And realistically speaking, that's the bottom line. Like, you look at Ryan Johnson. Say what you want to about Ryan Johnson's movies, they're on budget.
Yeah.
He doesn't run over long. He doesn't run over budget, and he knows how to work the financing. So there's always a decent return on the investment on his money. So Ryan Johnson will continue to be able to make whatever kind of movie he wants to make.
Right, and actually that's one of the reasons why Clint Eastwood is still so popular as a director because he does bring movies in on time and under budget, and they make a healthy return on investment. Joker, cost I think what 60 million production budget, and with the marketing and distribution and merchandise probably ballpark about 120 million dollars total
Actually,
budget.
I've heard it's lower. I've heard
Oh,
it's as
really?
low as 80 million for the total package of what it cost.
Okay, well that makes its box office gross even more impressive because that one cleared $1 billion at the box
Yeah,
office. So I mean that's a huge return on investment. I mean that's like more than 10 times the amount that you spent on the movie itself.
but here's the
So
thing.
and so
I
you
was
wonder why isn't this the kind of direction that Warner Brothers is going in? I mean Shazam really I think would have done a lot better if it had had better timing
mm,
because it was released, kind of sandwiched in between Captain Marvel and Avengers Endgame. So, people were budgeting their movie going for that month to go see those two movies. And I think Shazam kind of suffered. But I think if it hadn't had that problem, if it had been released, let's say after Spider-Man: Far From Home had been out for a couple of weeks, I think it would have done so much better than it ended up doing because of the story itself and the I mean,
And the
because
performances.
right, and the performances too. I mean, I came out of the theater thinking I want to adopt the little girl who played Darla.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because she just came off as so uh, so sympathetic and so uh, innocent and adorable. It's like I wish I had that kid for my daughter.
And the girl they had playing Mary was also excellent.
Yeah, and also the actor they had playing Billy Batson. I mean, you've got a sympathetic character. All right, he's an orphan. You know, he's abandoned by his mother, so he's got abandonment issues. But he's still, and he's also kind of still in denial because he's, you know, obsessed with finding his mother, thinking, oh, you know, she's still out there looking for me, and doesn't want to admit the truth, and he kind of has to by the end. And you know, there's this touching scene, you know, for people who haven't seen it, spoilers. You know, he finally gets to reunite with his mother, only to find out, you know, yeah, she did abandon him because she couldn't raise him. She's in an abusive marriage, and she's, you know, still miserable in her life, and you know, still can't handle raising a kid on her own. So, you know, he returns the compass that she got from at the carnival all those years ago, and says, you know, here, I think you need this more than I do. And you know, the way that scene was written and executed, I mean, that's where Billy Batson really grows up inside.
Yeah.
You know, because you know, movies like this that, you know, have that dynamic of a boy trapped in the body of a man or vice versa. You know, I mean, if you look like at Big with Tom Hanks or Jack with Robin Williams, there's a lot of pathos in there, a lot of emotionally charged drama that you just can't help but like it, and so it just makes me come out of the theater thinking I really truly want this movie to do well. So you know, and I think Zachary Levi is actually back in training in anticipation for a sequel, so I hope we get one soon, because you know, it's getting to the point they're going to have to recast the kids playing the main characters unless they do a time jump. Yeah, but you know, it's still, you know, it was that kind of movie that really felt more like an MCU movie than a lot of the later stage MCU movies these days, because they tend to get a little bit full of themselves. But you know, it felt like, you know, something that DC should have started off with and then built up towards Justice League.
And also, it's been like 10 years since they announced the Black Adam movie.
Yeah.
It's baffling to me that they've made that decision when, again, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has only become more and more of a draw.
Yeah.
You
he's
want
actually
to pull
getting
that
up
out
in
right
years
away.
too. I mean, he's like what, pushing 50 or over 50 by now. So I mean, you don't want to wait too long.
He's in his late
40s,
mid 40s. He's either mid or late 40s, I think.
Yeah, I think he's like 49 or something, or if not actually 50 recently. But I'll have to double check. But
because he was on the University of Miami football team back in the 90s, back Luther days.
Right. And you know, so that, you know, that's the kind of movie that you're going to want to make sooner rather than later. But you know, to get to the original point of this video, which is to kind of follow up from my last one. I don't know if you want to call up on your screen, you know, the comment section on my last video. I've got it up here now. But there's some of this which really it gets interesting, because like I said, I mean, I get the feeling that, you know, a lot of these guys really cannot handle the truth, and they really don't know how to articulate why they love the movie so much. They just love it because it's not the Joss Whedon version.
It's because they're obsessed with aesthetics, and that's what a lot of pop culture fandom has been driven by.
Right.
And aesthetics over actual substance.
Yeah, and that's why I like the Richard Donner Superman so much. And like I said, even the 3-hour version, which had a lot of stuff that, you know, you understand why it was cut out, but it still advances the plot and moves the, you know, everything forward, and you know, develops the whole concept of the nuclear missiles being hijacked. Whereas, you know, with the stuff that's added to Justice League, I mean, it's like why was this put in? I don't need
Why
to.
did
I
why did
don't
we
need
rip
an
off the
extended
shot from
sequence.
Why do we rip off a shot from Lord of the Rings to set up a sequence that Wonder Woman will see on TV later?
Right, exactly, and this is like the whole Arrow of Artemis thing. It's like, again, show, don't tell. All you needed to do is like release the Arrow of Artemis and draw it back, but Snyder has to draw it out over like what, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
It's like, no, dude, I don't need a whole A&E biography about the Arrow of Artemis before it actually gets fired. And I don't need all this slow motion pomp and circumstance with the act of firing it and have it going all the way, because it's like, that this is one of those things where Whedon, as trash as he is as a human being, he's still the superior director because he tries to put in more substance and there's often a lot more substance over the quips and jokes than you might realize.
And allegedly, he was given a hard timestamp. He had to get it 2.5 hours.
Right. So, yeah, and
he did what he had to do.
Right, and this one guy was like saying, "Oh, the runtime was based on a studio mandate. You can't introduce 3 new characters in a 2-hour runtime." Well, first of all,
yes. Well, hold up. Yes, you're absolutely right. The studio was terrible for making that decision. They should have introduced Flash and Cyborg in their own separate movies before they did this. You are 100% correct, sir.
Right. So, right, and that's what this guy is saying. But here's the thing: he doesn't understand why he's correct, because he feels that you needed a 4-hour movie just to introduce 3 new characters who added nothing to the story anyway. And my response is, the runtime is actually determined by the theaters, which make their ticket sales based on how many viewings of a given movie they can cram in during a single day of operation. I mean, generally speaking, a runtime's average about 2 hours, with the exceptions made for guaranteed box office hits like Avengers Endgame. But those are the exceptions and not the rule. And, a 4-hour runtime is, it's dead on arrival in a movie theater, because no owner is going to want to lose money on ticket sales running 2 or 3 screenings or maybe 3 if you can, or 4 if you can get away with it, when there are other movies that can be placed like 6, 8, or 10 times a day depending on the length. I mean, because you've got your hour-and-a-half long movies, which are generally tend to be like horror movies or comedies, and then you've got your 2.5 hour dramas, and again, they're event films like Avengers Endgame. But like I said, those are the exceptions, because it's something that was built up over 10 years, so naturally you're going to bend your own rules and have the movie playing on multiple screens,
yeah,
so that
absolutely.
you can get right, so you can make your money back. So I mean, to say that it's oh, it's the only reason it was 2 hours was because of the studio mandate. Well, yeah, because no studio executive who is in his right mind is going to say, yeah, let's force a 4-hour long movie onto the theater so that we don't make a return on the movie that we made.
And the theaters are going to say, fine, we need a bigger cut of the movie, which it's going to screw everything up.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, the idea that, you can blame the studio for the forcing a 2-hour runtime, which happens to most movies. I mean, you begin to see where the arguments that these guys are making are falling apart, as they make them.
Yeah, like, maybe we shouldn't have introduced Aquaman in a PowerPoint presentation in Batman v Superman.
Exactly.
Maybe we shouldn't have introduced Wonder Woman in like a fight cameo when we're already introducing Batman, and when the movie's called Batman v Superman.
Right.
Maybe you want to have Wonder Woman be your tease at the end of that movie to lead you into the Wonder Woman movie.
Exactly. So, I mean,
maybe you don't want to make the death of Superman and Batman v Superman and Doomsday all be one movie payday, when you can have those be 3 separate movie paydays and make money off of all 3 movies, as opposed to making less money on one movie.
Exactly. So, I mean, like I said, you get the feeling these guys really don't understand their own argument. And I'm just having a laugh whenever I read through a lot of this stuff, because it's like, in fact, one guy actually was going into characterizations, and I had to correct him, because it's like, characterization is when you create or construct a fictional character and describe that character or object's distinctive traits or nature. It's got nothing to do with character development, which is like fleshing out a character or a character arc that causes growth or whether it's spiritual or mental growth or emotional or moral growth.
So let's talk about Barry Allen from this movie. Reasons this movie says the Snyder version I should care about Barry Allen. He's socially awkward. His dad's in jail. He's got a girlfriend he tried to save. That's it. In the theatrical version, he's got a dad that's in jail and he doesn't have any friends.
Right, but he does get to at least trying to pull his weight. When he's like, in the big climax part of the movie during the third act. He's trying to save this carload of people, and then Superman's flying an entire apartment building and kind of showing him up, and it's like, but you get this, you get the sense that at least there was an effort made to turn Barry Allen Flash into a hero, whereas in the Snyder cut it was like by the time they got done with the entire slow motion sequence, I was like, oh my god, dude. I honestly fell asleep.
The value for his character in that movie was he's there to be the MacGuffin at the end of the movie to save the day. And I mean, yeah, but you want to give us a reason to care about him first, and you want to adequately set up, like, with Bruce Wayne saying to him, wait, are you fast enough to travel through time? And he's like, no, you can't travel through time. There's so many millions upon millions of variables. If you alter a single variable from time, even if it's for the best reason in the world, you'll destabilize the timelines. You'll break the multiverse apart, yada, yada, yada. And then you set it up so the world's about to end and he breaks the rule. Set off, establishment with the thing in the middle with the cube, payoff. So he can't even set up his own ideas in a movie,
right? And because you have to be able to raise the stakes too. It's like, I might be able to time travel, but it might end up causing more damage. It's like, okay, you remember the original Ghostbusters from 1984? What's the warning?
Yes.
In the hotel, don't cross the streams.
Yeah.
And what do they do by the end of the film?
They cross the streams because it's the only way out.
Right. It's like the last ditch option when everything else has failed. And so they have to take a gamble that they won't all die, and of course it pays off. They don't die; they all survive. But this is a kind of thing where you have some real stakes here, and the way that the Snyder Cut handled it, it was like, oh yeah, we're going to go ahead and say that this is a dangerous thing to do, but then we do it without any hitch, and it doesn't seem like there's any problems. And it's like, no, you actually have to have a reason why. We don't know if this will actually work, and why it's such an act of desperation to make it, to make that decision. And the way he handles it, it's like cavalier and it's contradictory. It's like, but wait, you said that this was so dangerous, but then it just works without any problems.
And that's really one of the deeper problems with the movie. So what's another good mean comment from the comment section?
Okay, so and a lot of the ones are coming from the same people, but so here's one that I actually thought was hilarious. Okay, and this one comes from Bad Tits, but from about a week ago. The Snyder Cut was like if Bollywood or Russia tried to make Avengers: Age of Ultron.
No, have you watched a Bollywood movie? They have superhero movies in Bollywood. Those are amazingly bizarre.
They are.
They're bizarre in an entirely different way than this movie. Like, there's one about, an evil computer virus thing that's, like, actually a possessed evil spirit of a bunch of dead birds. And they have to get an evil robot that's good now to fight him. And then, like, he converts everybody's cell phones into tiny robots.
I've seen a Bollywood movie. I've seen a Bollywood action movie where the guy does a complete and total rip-off of Michael Jackson's Thriller within the movie, and it's like almost shot for shot, and it's a Bollywood version of it.
Yeah,
and it was just so out there. I think I downloaded that clip from somewhere, and it's just really, really stupid. Okay, but here's another one that really. Okay, so boring, forgettable, nihilistic trash. Ha 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 ha. You're a joke man. Y-O-U-R. Possessive form of you. A joke man. So Maya joke. What the hell does that even fucking mean?
I mean, grammar trolls are the lowest form form of trolls.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like, oh my god, dude. And then, okay, so, but here's one that I really liked: the 3 best quotes that describe Snyder holistically. 1, I always thought Snyder was a high school jock who just discovered Bukowski and Leonard Cohen, and the guy who helps him with his math test told him about Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. 2,
I mean, that sounds like a realistic description. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, 2, Mark Commodi on the Snyder Cut. It is now uniformly boring, as opposed to before when it was fractured and disjointed boring. 3, Richard Meyer, your boy Zach, on the Snyder Cut. A sincere work of edgelord gloom by a 55-year-old teenager.
I mean, yeah. Those are all fair. Those are all fair statements.
Yeah, I just cracked up on that. And it's like... and then one says, well, watching a Snyder film is like reading a 30-page single-spaced undergrad philosophy essay. That's just a self-congratulatory jizz of esoteric opinion that means absolutely nothing. Much like this comment, but I tried to keep it short. So it's a fairly even mix of positive and negative reviews. But when your only reply is, "Lol, this review sucks," and you don't say anything else.
I mean, honestly, like my best comment about the original Avengers movie done by Joss Whedon is he does 50% of the good Joss Whedon things. He does 50% more in that movie, and he does 50% less of the bad Joss Whedon things.
Right.
And that's why Avengers is one of the best movies in the genre of action films, and it's one of the essential movies in the superhero film genre.
Yeah.
If you're going to be an appreciator of film.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems I have with hacks like Snyder, Abrams, Johnson, Roland Emmerich, Michael Bay, Paul Feig. It's like these people come across as people who don't actually like cinema, but they're given the task of making movies, and it's like that. I mean, you talk to someone like Peter Weller or Martin Scorsese or Ridley Scott. I mean, you can't get these people to shut up about all the things that inspire them. Quentin Tarantino, he'll talk your ear off for hours, maybe days if you let him, about all the things that went into influencing his films. And with Rob Zombie, I mean, like or hate his work, you can tell where all this stuff that influenced him went into his films because The Devil's Rejects. No, it's like House of a Thousand Corpses was clearly a nod to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, and all that stuff that really kind of influenced him when he was younger. Same thing with the Devil's Rejects, even though that was a bit more down to earth, along with Three from Hell. And then, of course, you get stuff like The Haunted World of El Super Beasto, where you can tell the influence of Ralph Bakshi. In a lot of that.
Also, Rob Zombie played a lot of Werewolf the Apocalypse in live-action role-playing back in the day.
Yeah.
He would, back when he was touring, if there was a LARP group in the area and he had the time after a show, he would show up to people's games and play.
Yeah. I remember reading about that, and it was like, oh my god. I mean, how cool is that? I mean, you got Rob Zombie joining your Werewolf the Apocalypse game. But
or like, how cool would it be if you randomly were at some friend's house and Vin Diesel showed up wanting to play D&D? I mean, I'm not sure how good a D&D player Vin Diesel is from what I've seen of evidence of it on YouTube, but how cool would that be?
Right, and then you've got people like George Lucas. I mean, for all his flaws as a storyteller, mainly in his later work. I mean, but his original Star Wars trilogy, from the 77 to 83, as it is unaltered, you can tell all the influences that went into it. Everything from World War II films to Kurosawa samurai films to John Ford westerns to a healthy dose of Tolkien. I mean, Darth Vader, if you think about it, at the end of Return of the Jedi, he's Gollum.
Or how about also all the influence he had on future people? How many people learned their craft in film and television making doing the Young Indiana Jones Chronicle?
Exactly. So, and Spielberg, he's got a lot of flaws himself as a filmmaker. I think he focused, I mean, to the extent that, The Color Purple and Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List were great.
Schindler's List is a legitimately good movie.
Right. I mean, don't get me wrong; they're all good, but you can kind of tell whether it's a bit more, shallow in its reverence for, and kind of like being overly romantic about the historical period that he's depicting, whereas the reality was much more brutal. All right. I mean, the opening sequence in Saving Private Ryan with the recreation of the Battle of Normandy on D-Day. I mean, that, left a lot of people, including myself, mildly shell-shocked watching it because, it was a hyper-realistic depiction, but then it goes into this, hyper-romanticized movie that I think was like, yeah, I mean,
but
I can tell it's a bit too reverential for toward its source material.
But here's the thing about Saving Private Ryan. It has to set up so brutal, so you're setting your stakes for the titular Private Ryan that they're going to go find. That's why they're all going to save him.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do agree. I mean, that's why I just think that there's too much reverence for the source material, and you don't want to disrespect it the way that someone like Zack Snyder or Jar Jar Abrams or Ruin Johnson do at every turn. But you do also want to make sure that you're having a healthy disrespect for it, much the way Nicholas Meyer did when he directed Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan and Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. Because what Meyer was
Wrath
about,
of Khan, there were so many beautiful elements in the background of the shot, like how Moby Dick in like a leather-bound book is on a bookshelf in the little bunker that Khan is in.
Yeah.
And like that's like one of the only books you see there, and you think he read that book for years in anger.
And Khan was the kind of guy who was a huge devotee of Milton and other. You get the feeling he would have fancied himself as Captain Ahab, but at the same time, it's like you get where the phrase that he approached it with a healthy disrespect for Roddenberry, where he obviously he had not seen an episode of Star Trek, but he watched Space Seed to get an idea of because and it's based on the realities of syndication at the time, where you would have your first run episodes, but then it goes to syndication and they're broadcast out of order. So by necessity, television show episodes had to be self-contained, and you might have a reference to another episode. But if you were, a casual viewer coming in watching this on syndication or rerun, and it's completely out of order from, from whatever episode the network decides to pull from, you don't necessarily need to go back and watch all the preceding episodes in order in order to get an idea of what's going on. All right, and so you don't necessarily have lasting consequences or revisiting that in a later episode down the line because, again, you couldn't really do that because of nowadays syndication, you get the episodes broadcast in order, but back in the 60s that wasn't the case. So what Meyer was doing was he was like, okay, so what if we took an episode of Star Trek where Kirk makes this decision and now we see the consequences of that playing out years later? Because he just kind of like, okay, so yeah, he spares Khan. He doesn't lock him up in a Federation penal colony along with his wife and his co-conspirators. He actually goes ahead and says, okay, we're going to leave you on this planet. You're going to be allowed to conquer it the way you wanted to conquer the world, back on Earth. So you're not going to have, a lot of time to go ahead and try and, steal a spaceship and go out and conquer another planet. We're giving you one to conquer. There's no other people on there, but, but so that was an act of mercy. And at the time, it seemed like a good idea. You save yourself a bunch of paperwork that you don't want to have to deal with, and it's actually established within the episode Space Seed that, they always kind of had a sneaking admiration for Khan because, unlike the other Supermen, who were his contemporaries.
Khan wasn't a brutal thug.
Right. He wasn't as brutal a thug as the others were. So, and then of course 15 years that go by and, Khan's already seen the devastation of that planet he was given to rule and the death of his wife and, at least 20 of his 80 or so people. And so you get the sense that he's been driven quite mad, and it's understandable the actions that he takes when he escapes from the planet.
Yeah, and Kirk probably told Federation Command what he did, and they probably thought, yeah, that's a reasonable thing to do. And when that planet got blown up, nobody probably said, hey, didn't we put the genetic Superman dictator on that planet? Shouldn't we
Yeah,
check
they
to see if
probably
he's
thought the wrong
alive?
planet blew up, so
Yeah, so that's part of it too. Like he was completely forgotten, but he didn't forget any of them.
right. So you get this wonderful film that highlights that what happened if you took one of those self-contained episodes and say, what if we had a sequel where you had to actually face the consequences of that? And then of course with the Star Trek 3 and 4 were more light. Well, I don't want to say lighthearted. Star Trek 4 was lighthearted. Star Trek 3 was more serious, but it was. I'll put it to you this way: it's not one of Leonard Nimoy's better films.
Right, but in fairness, you had to do Star Trek 3 because sure they killed Spock in Star Trek 2. I mean, spoiler for the 1980s, by the way, for any of you who weren't alive or haven't seen that movie in the multiple decades since it's been out. There was no way Spock wasn't coming back.
Right, because I mean, you just can't. And I would suspect that, and if that William Shatner, I think it was a year or two ago, he kind of came to a realization about Spock, and with regards to Leonard Nimoy, basically manipulating the studio into getting the director's chair twice, and getting more money, and remarking on how Leonard had been very shrewd and master at getting what he wanted. So I mean, it's kind of like a backhanded admiration for a friend who had by then had passed away. But it's like. So you have to give credit to Leonard Nimoy for being shrewd enough to do that. But I think by the time Star Trek V rolls around, Shatner, his contract stipulated that he get whatever Nimoy got. Nimoy had gotten 2 shots at the director's chair, and Shatner wanted his turn. He had a right to it.
And Star Trek V,
the studio,
good movie.
Yeah. The studio really treated that movie badly, during the production phase because one. There was a writer's strike that went on that delayed production. By the time they were able to get back up and running, the studio decided, we're not going to give you nearly the budget that the previous movies had. Industrial Light and Magic, they're off working on Indiana Jones and Ghostbusters 2. And, so he didn't have the special effects that he really wanted to realize his vision. But the bones of a good story were there where, and it actually goes into, what happens when you have a family member you've basically disowned and pretended never existed because you can't admit to this guy. And the novelization kind of fleshes out, some of the things that Cyborg did to get himself in that situation. But, since then he's kind of become like this religious fanatic who, is a very charismatic leader, kind of leading people astray. He's well-intentioned. But towards the end, he realizes, he screwed up big time, and he has to rectify it, even if it means.
But the beauty of that movie is that scene where James T. Kirk asked, "Why does God need a starship?"
Exactly. It's like, excuse me.
That's what everything was leading to.
I have some more questions. Yeah, I mean, and right, and that was really brilliantly executed. I mean, even George Takei, who despises Shatner. Was saying that it was a rather pleasant time on set, and Shatner managed to keep a lot of the backstage drama off set. So it was a movie that I think had loads of problems, but it really wasn't entirely Shatner's fault. But I think he was trying to get the franchise back to basics of what Star Trek on the big screen should be, which is to continue the television series in a way. And it was a story that I thought had loads of potential. It just wasn't really allowed to be fully realized. And Shatner didn't get final cut of it either. So there's that. There is that. So, and then of course Star Trek 6 follows up on it, and it's more a direct sequel to Star Trek 2, but also kind of like the 3 films that it. Come immediately before it.
It's the coda for the movies for the original cast.
Yeah, and again, we see the consequences of events in the previous films now leading to the events of Star Trek Six, and Meyer really kind of pulled it off. Now, just to kind of reiterate my point, Meyer approached it with a healthy disrespect for Roddenberry's vision. It didn't mean that he despised Roddenberry or thought he was unrealistic, or because Star Trek: The Motion Picture I thought was brilliant. Okay, I know a lot of people don't like it. I thought it was one of those films where it just embodied Gene Roddenberry's unfiltered vision, much the way that
the Snyder Cut does.
Right, for Zack Snyder. So,
and it was also a bloated mess.
It was, but not in the way I think most people have been raised to believe. Because I mean, yeah, you can say too many scenes of going over the Enterprise, but there was a real reason for that. And again, this kind of highlights the difference between a movie like Star Trek: The Motion Picture and Zack Snyder's Justice League, whereas you get that ship porn where you've got the shuttle flying around the Enterprise before it finally manages to dock, but that was to highlight the difference in scale between the human beings inhabiting the Enterprise and the ship itself. It's much bigger than it used to be because of the refit. And then when you get to later in the film, when the Enterprise reaches V'ger is enormous. The Enterprise is now tiny up against this huge alien menace.
Yeah.
And when it goes inside V'ger, it's like entering a solar system-sized spaceship, which makes the human beings inside even smaller by comparison. So, I mean, there are legitimate reasons that...
But, and at the end, it all comes down to one man, one woman, creation and creator, which is ultimately the smallest thing.
Exactly. So that was a film that, depending on your point of view... Yeah, you could say that it was, kind of a boring mess. I mean, I wasn't a fan of the uniforms, neither was anyone else, apparently, because we got a huge change away from those to what we got from Star Trek 2 onward.
My issue is it was bloated. I think it was... Because Gene needed a strong hand to kind of have him tighten and focus his vision.
Yeah, and still, though, for all its flaws, I mean, you can at least see where... it comes together. I mean, it might take a while to get there, but in my mind, I could forgive some of the bloat because it still managed to move the story along and kind of illustrate the nature of the threat and the basic message of the story itself is that against the biggest threat, sometimes the smallest solution or the smallest person can defeat the biggest adversary.
Yeah.
So I mean that's, I mean it's not a bad message. It's just a little muddled.
Yeah. So, but before we wrap this up, I want to ask if I can do a little shilling here. So we've talked a lot about Zack Snyder's big, bloated, angry, nihilistic teenager movie. Let's talk about something small. Let's talk about an adaptation.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a crowdfunding comic book.
Yeah, and although just to warn you, Larry, you're likely to draw the ire of Snyder fans onto your YouTube channel now because you've gone ahead and set that little.
Luckily, I'm not actively YouTubing, and but yeah. So there's an independent comic creator called Matt Krotz who's down in Naples/Fort Myers, Florida, who has a comic book series that he's done 2 editions of called Kyrie. And his artistic style is very Franco-Belgian. As you can see, if you look near the bottom of the Indiegogo page, you'll see one of the pages he actually drew related to the current campaign. And you see it's very Franco-Belgian.
Yeah.
And he's done 2 successful comics. He made a good profit margin, so he decided to do an anthology comic book to get out of the South Asian Greek time period that was the focus of his 2 books and get into adventure stories in the same universe that are set in a more broad time frame. And so he had this notion of a story that he wanted to do. He wanted to combine Sherlock Holmes with Rudyard Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King, because Dr. Watson and the titular 2 characters of The Man Who Would Be King, who were famously played by Sean Connery and Michael Caine, Danny and Peachy, all 3 of these men were in the Anglo-Afghan War. So I made a pitch to him. We went back and forth a little bit. We ended up coming up with a script. I developed the structure. there were a couple of different scripts, so he edited all of the different scripts. We worked out into a single structure. He polished the language. I came up with the characters and the basic structure of the narrative, the conflict, and thus my first published comic book is called The Kandahar Crisis, which is part of the expanded Kyrie universe.
All right.
It's an adventure tale of two sort of rapscallion British soldiers and Dr. John Watson, and they have to go on a little tomb robbery, and they're facing off against a team of Sikh soldiers in the British military who are trying to steal from the same tomb as part of a goal to restore the Sikh monarchy in the early days of the British Empire.
Okay, so yeah, all right, so yeah, I'm gonna be dropping a link to that in the description along with the Indiegogo link. So yeah, so shoot me those.
And if you're going to buy the comic book straight out, you can get the PDF for $7. You can get the comic book in the ash can for $15, or for $20 with a holographic cover. So that's 2 independent comic books for $15. That's an amazing price point, because independent comics have to be a little bit more expensive because obviously they don't have the economy of scale. He's reselling his first 2 books in the series for $35. That is several hundred pages of content in all 3 books you could buy together. And if you look at the art for the Kandahar Crisis, which is the one where you see the Sikhs in the turban, the artist, Jesse White, he does a style that's very evocative of like Prince Valiant, which I really dig for a pulp action story.
Okay, so yeah, you've got my interest in this, so I'll definitely be checking it out, and when I get paid next, I might be able to put a little bit towards the Indiegogo.
Yeah, and this has already hit its goal, so it's at, as of right now, like almost 900% of the original goal, because he's funded it off the profits of his book. So there's no risk of not getting anything. You're gonna get a product.
Yeah, and the more, right? So basically, you've raised your fundraising goal. So anything after that, you're contributing towards the next project.
Basically.
Yeah. So
and Matt and I have a couple of other projects we have discussed, including another project in this particular branch of his setting. So there's going to be more good comic books that are going to come out of all of this.
All right. Yeah, you've got my interest, and actually, I would like to collaborate on writing a story. In fact, if you don't mind, since we're all creatives, there is a Batman fan film that I would like to do where he focuses on more on the detective aspect of it, but it's nothing like what Matt Reeves is putting together with his stuff.
Yeah.
Which,
I mean,
and that could be another topic. That could be a topic for the discussion, because Mr. H Reviews, he's been kind of debunking some of the rumor clickbait surrounding that movie, because it wrapped. It's in the can now. It's in the editing phase, so obviously it's not a production that's falling apart if it just wrapped. So, but he's been keeping up on this, and I think it's pretty interesting what he's had to say about it, and I kind of figured, a lot of the clickbait that goes out there, I think, there are certain channels, I won't name names, but there's certain channels where they'll take something that really should not be getting all that much attention, because it's kind of like, okay, it's rumor. Do you have anything substantial about it, or are you just, do you have anything concrete that we can use? And so there's this tendency to try and rush towards a clickbait and make claims or imply claims that it turns out really aren't going to happen.
Yeah.
And you end up having to retract yourself, because it's that, well, we did say that this was only rumor. Well, okay, I get reporting on the rumor, but you don't have to necessarily feed the rumor just to generate clicks, all right? I mean, keep it, if there's a real news story there, go for it. But if not,
You mean like how the intelligence community reported rumors about the Russians trying to have a bounty on American soldiers, and have after that they leaked that to the media to use in the presidential election? 4 months after the election is over, they're saying, "Oh yeah, that was totally bogus. That thing that we
yeah,
leaked to the media to
right,
influence the election."
which is why we should take with a 1.4 metric ton grain of salt the pretty much anything coming out of United States intelligence about Uyghurs in China being genocided and thrown into concentration camps. Because when you look at the source for all that stuff, I keep getting reminded of the run up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, where they kept recycling the same discredited stuff from the same drunken expatriate and kept farming it up, kept selling it to the other nation's intelligence agencies, who then debunked it, and then they just repackage the same stuff and send it back out again. So, it's just, I don't trust the Chinese or Russian governments any further than I can throw them. But I'm not, but knowing my own government's track record with the truth, I'm not going to automatically buy into that either.
At the same point in time, we also exist in the world where the president, during the middle of a big presentation to try to show Indo-Pacific unity, referred to the Prime Minister of Japan as that boy who won the Masters.
Yeah.
The Masters. And we need to realize that there's a lot of sizzle, not a lot of steak in this world. Who forgets the name of his
own Secretary of Defense, too.
Yeah. We live in a world with a lot of sizzle, not a lot of steak.
Yeah.
And you can hear rumors and stories, and you have to ask yourself, okay, am I listening to sizzle? Am I listening to steak?
Right.
There was actually a spy movie I heard that talked about something called the ashtray theory. You can break an ashtray into 3 pieces. You give somebody 1 piece, it might be an ashtray. If you give them 2 pieces, you're pretty sure it's the ashtray. Once you get all 3 pieces, you know it's the ashtray.
Yeah.
And so they talked about how the Russian spies would focus on giving somebody 1 of the 3 pieces of the ashtray, and then a 2nd piece if they had to. But never all 3 pieces of the ashtray, so that they could not provide the complete information. And the studios do the same thing. Like every thing that talks about how there's the civil war inside of Lucasfilm, there is a cynical, underhanded motive. There are people inside of Lucasfilm who are involved, and they want to say, listen, I didn't make those decisions. Somebody else did.
Yeah.
So I'm going to present a story that makes that person look bad. And then if you're a person whose name is J.J. Abrams, you in turn leak stories saying, listen, guys, I tried to make this as best I could, but everything was a mess over here. It's not my fault.
Right, and it actually very much was his fault for much of it, because, he's just a very shallow, one-dimensional director who relies on that magic mystery box with no payoff. And
I think a bigger thing.
I'm sorry, you're out of frame. Like you're kind of.
I think a bigger thing for JJ. Right. Pardon me. What was that?
Yeah, you're moving out of frame.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, maybe
so I think
a little bit to your right. Yeah.
I think a bigger thing for J.J. Abrams is they like him in the studios. They like J.J.
He does what he's told
without on a budget.
Right. He does what he's told, basically. I mean, they want a movie making by checkbox. He'll check off the laundry list and won't even think about the results. So.
And with the exception of The Rise of Skywalker, he'll make a movie on budget.
Right. And that's
I think The Rise of
Skywalker
is obviously the most expensive movie.
And much like with Justice League, because of all the reshoots, they made 1 movie for the price of 2. Much like with Solo, a Star Wars story. I remember we discussed that a few years ago when it came out, and you wonder why these movies don't do as well as they should at the box office. Well, when you fire directors and bring in another one, and you have to reshoot essentially the whole movie. I mean,
neither of us have produced a big budget movie, but we understand enough of the principles that there's a break-even point. There's also a point of no return of saying, listen, if the director goes off track and we don't route him back at this point, we're probably going to lose just as much money if we let him do what he does versus having to come in, chop the thing together, Frankenstein it with like another director or two. Or there was a famous movie done by Roger Corman, just as a goof and an experiment, where he had like 8 different directors in it that starred Jack Nicholson.
Yeah. There was a recent YouTube broadcast of the Spanish language edition of
Yeah.
that, the El Terror, I think it was, or the Terror.
Yeah.
Because Corman, just for background, Roger Corman had directed The Raven with Vincent Price and Peter Lorre and Boris Karloff, and then Jack Nicholson, I think, was also in that. And then he had some days left to shoot, so he decided to, before Boris Karloff, left, he shot some scenes with him, and then as that experiment, they ended up going through like something like 8 or 10 directors before they got something that could be cobbled together. And the results were, let's just say they were less than impressive. But it was one of Jack Nicholson's earliest starring roles.
And Corman sold it, and he didn't lose any money after he sold the movie.
Yeah, which just goes to show you, I mean, Roger Corman is a rare kind of director these days who knows how to make a cheap movie and have it look better than it actually is, and still make some money off of it. I mean, he's the one who basically made Fantastic Four just so the studio could keep the rights. And I still would love to see that thing in total, because
and the actors all thought that was going to be a legit movie, because comic book movies were cheap back then, and they all thought they were going to have an opportunity to be a part of something special.
Dude, I saw that was Generation X on Fox, the TV movie, with Fiona Hughes and what's his name, who played Sean Cassidy, and oh my god, that was a movie made purely to keep the rights to mutant characters on Fox. Matt Frewer played the bad guy.
That would be a fun documentary. A documentary called "All the Movies Made to Keep the Rights Were Movies Made Out of Spite."
Yeah. Oh, speaking of spite. Getting back to our original topic, I watched the whole movie Troll. You should watch a movie before blowing your mouth. This is from, so there are some people who were on here saying, "Oh, I watched the movie. You clearly didn't watch the movie," and it's like, yeah, unfortunately, I did.
I mean, I would have been happy if the Snyder Cut movie was different. If there was something different, I would have been happier with it than what I got.
Yeah, it's...
I mean, we also had Steppenwolf's motivations were more complex. I wouldn't say they were better, but they were more complex. He was a middle manager who is devoted to his boss, and his boss is mad at him for a stupid reason.
Yeah, which, again, and that brings to mind that same problem that we had with Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor and Ed Beatty's Otis in the original Superman the movie, where all those scenes in the 3-hour television version make the bad guy look more incompetent than he really is. And I can see why they were cut out from the theatrical cut, because I mean, you walk a fine line with that sort of villain dynamic with his sidekick, because you want him to actually present a real threat to Superman. He doesn't have the sheer brawn to take him on, so he has to rely solely on his wits and Superman's naivety. And if you make him too comedic, it's just going to be a mess.
But you know what I do want to say? I think this golden age of comic book superhero movies is coming to an end soon, because
I think it's already ended.
I think Endgame was the literal Endgame, and Spider-Man Far From Home was the coda. I think there's still going to be things that are good in the genre, much like the golden age of Westerns ended, but Westerns didn't end. I think there's going to be a point in which we're all going to realize that this gravy train is done.
Yeah.
I think
if superhero movies or comic book movies in general are going to survive, they're going to need to be on the level of, say, Shazam or a Joker, because Shazam, like I said, I mean, it was a film that felt more like an MCU movie early days, than most of what MCU is now producing, and that's actually a good thing because this is the kind of thing that DCEU should have done from the beginning. And with regards to Shazam, I think better late than never. But I think you're right. I mean, that horse has pretty much left the barn. And Joker was
Yeah.
more a love letter to Martin Scorsese films, uh, with
But
the
but
backdrop of one of the many imagined origins that the Joker has for himself.
here's what I think about the DCEU, and also related to it is the Arrowverse. Is there was a compelling story with a compelling character that then told us there were other compelling characters, and then we got other compelling stories with other compelling characters that all led to a big moment, the Avengers. Then we got even more of these stories, which are all leading us to the big moment, the big fight with Thanos at the end. And then we have the big fight with Thanos at the end. And using wrestling terminology, that's the end of your. That's the end. That's your blow off match, where the bad guy wins in Infinity War. Then the heroes come back, get their heat back, beat him in Endgame.
Yeah,
And that's what the MCU. That was the steam. That was the energy. That was the juggernaut. And watching WandaVision and watching Falcon and Winter Soldier, I don't think they have any compelling direction to drive the audience towards.
yeah. I mean, WandaVision, from what I understand, I haven't had the chance to watch it yet. I know Thorias Unlimited seemed to like it right up until the end, where it kind of dropped the ball, in his opinion. Uh,
So here's
but
my take on WandaVision.
yeah,
So WandaVision has a gimmick. It's an obvious gimmick. And it's very focused because it's the hot trend to focus on, and it has been for like the last 5 to 10 years. It's very focused on trauma theory. It's
yeah,
very
because
focused
yeah,
on
she's dealing
trauma theories
with the
and narrative.
trauma of losing her husband, who, even though he's an android, but she still had feelings for him. So she
Well,
recreates him.
also his brother also lost the brother, grew up as in a war torn area. All of that
Yeah,
crystallizes.
yeah, and kind of mirrors what Scarlet Witch's a story arc in the comics, where we have like House of M, and the story the storyline kind of culminates in Scarlet Witch saying no more mutants, and she wipes out the powers for most of the mutants on the planet, which kind of which I can kind of understand why Marvel did that, because that they had built up this X-Men universe to the point where it's like they had way too many characters that they didn't know what to do with, and you can't keep killing them off and bringing them back repeatedly, and
And
you
they
can't
also
keep
had a mutant
introducing.
section of New York City, an
Right,
entire section of New York City that was just mutants.
right. So they really kind of had to go back to basics, and reduce the number of characters, because you can't keep introducing new ones, then dropping them and bringing them back, and trying to see what works, and then try and have it all tied together. It became too much to handle. So I
But
understand why they did it.
here's the problem with the focus on trauma theory for most pop culture things that are using it. They focus on trauma theory to tell us that there's depth in the work, but not really show it.
Right.
Because Elizabeth Olsen's an excellent actress. She's been in these movies, but we don't have a meaningful connection to her relationship to Vision.
Right. And
We
after
don't really have a meaningful connection to Vision, played by Paul Bettany, another excellent actor.
yeah.
So it's
And if you want to
saying
see
you should
Elizabeth
feel
Olsen,
bad.
right? If you want to see Elizabeth Olsen, a really good movie that I thought really didn't get the distribution it deserved, it's called Wind River, where she plays an FBI agent who's investigating the murder of a Native woman on
Oh,
tribal
wow.
lands, and it's more in the story, and Jeremy Renner has the lead, the male lead. So it's really more his story, but
Huh.
Elizabeth Olsen did a very good job in that as a supporting actress,
Hmm.
who kind of teams up with them to try and solve this murder. And I mean, the ending is kind of telegraphed, but still, the way it was written and executed, I thought it was actually really good. Uh, and I saw it at the Cedar Lee Theater on one of its offshoot
Hmm.
screens. Uh, it wasn't on one of the screens off the main lobby, which are much bigger. So this is almost like looking at it on a large screen television, which I thought kind of did it a disservice because I felt it really deserved better than what
But
it got.
her character has been in these movies, but we've not really had a chance to connect to her character. We've not had a chance to breathe. So we have to wallow in the show saying, look at all this trauma she's having. And
Right, and
it's
you haven't
not
really built it
earned.
up, right? Because she was kind of brought in as this character. I mean, she's a mutant. She could easily have been brought in as part of a rebooted X-Men franchise, especially after Fox was acquired by Disney. But they really never got around to developing the character previous to the movies, and so
Yeah.
now you're trying to develop the character backward from this point and kind of flesh her out. And it's like, yeah, you really
And
needed to have her own films.
but the problem is just because she has trauma doesn't mean that you remove the moral context of what she does in the show.
Exactly.
And the show tries to ignore that. And it hand waves it away, and that's why it doesn't work, number one. And number two, remember what I said about, they're going somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So they establish her and Vision's kids in this alternate little situation.
Right, and if you read the comics, their kids together were actually figments of her imagination. She would leave the room, they would blink out of existence, and then pop back in once she walked back in.
And they were connected to Mephisto, and then later they became part of the Young Avengers. And in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they introduced Isaiah Bradley, who becomes a focal point for another one of the characters in Young Avengers.
Yeah.
There's talk that they're going to put America Chavez in a movie. So again, that's another character. They're building up towards the Young Avengers movie, but we don't have a reason to care that they're building up to the Young Avengers movie.
Right. And I think Kevin Feige really has kind of taken the whole MCU about as far as he can go. So it almost seems like we're going to need I don't know if a soft reboot would work, but maybe a hard reboot where you kind of start
think
over.
There's a lot of different business issues that are causing a problem for the MCU, but I think one of the big things is they don't want to do the same thing over again. You could, for example, do the coming of Galactus as a thing.
Exactly.
Make that be your driving
right,
plot.
and that's where we bring in the Fantastic Four and Silver Surfer, who have a bigger connection to Galactus and, say, the Avengers.
And then you expand on that in the Guardians of the Galaxy. You could expand on that more in Captain Marvel.
Right, which
But
honestly they would need to recast Brie Larson and also kind of do a soft reboot of Captain Marvel because they really kind of screwed the pooch on that movie as well. Because again,
also they introduced Monica getting her powers in WandaVision, and it was kind of dumb.
Yeah, I've heard that, and it's like I don't know. It seems like and Disney really is kind of like 1 for 3 in terms of MCU, Star Wars, and some of its other properties that it's been doing because you had Kevin Feige heading up MCU, but then it bought up Lucasfilm. It had the same problem with the Star Wars franchise that Warner Brothers has had with DCEU, where it had no real direction for where it wanted to go. Yeah. And like I said, for all his flaws as a storyteller, George Lucas, you cannot accuse him of not planning things out well in advance.
And to one more thing about the 2 new Marvel TV shows, they introduced Johnny Walker as U.S. agent in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And real talk, Johnny Walker in the comics is a terrible character. He's poorly thought out. He's a bad take on Reagan-era jingoism. And sure, you could do that as a character. But this is an opportunity where subverting expectations would be a good thing. So what if you introduce John Walker and he's a really good guy. He's a solid guy. He's, a white bread, Southerner who's like, good moral values. He's a goody-goody. He's a soldier, and, there may be complicated things about the U.S. military with the audience, but he basically checks all those boxes. and he's a little awkward. He doesn't really have the natural charisma Steve has. And so he fakes it till he can make it with the charisma, and that leads him to a point where he gets in over his head. And he then works with Falcon and Bucky to solve a big problem, and that's when he realizes that Sam's the guy who needs to be Captain America.
Yeah.
And then he gives it up because the military chose him, the government chose him, and they didn't understand what being Captain America means. So you have him struggle, you have him grow as a hero, and then you have U.S. Agent being a character people will care about in an Avengers movie.
Yeah.
Or you'll care about him as a cameo in another movie or another TV show, and thus people will want to go watch it.
Right, and yeah, that would actually be the way to go if you're going to have that character in there. Because U.S. Agent, was really the sort of character, like you said, he's kind of like this rip-on, Reagan era jingoism, and
because he started as a professional wrestler,
right? And with Captain America, I remember there's a scene in one of the comics post Marvel Civil War where Spider-Man and Captain America are having this discussion, and Spidey's like he's at this situation where he's kind of doubting himself, and Captain America gives him this pep talk where it says look, your job as a hero isn't to make yourself conform to what everyone else thinks is right. If you know in your heart that you're right, that what you're doing is the right thing to do, and everyone else is wrong, then you draw your line in the sand, and you make everyone else say, you make everyone else stop and think about what they're doing, but or something to that effect. I can't.
Yeah.
Remember the exact words of the speech, but you can look it up. But it's like when people tell you to move out of the way, you draw that line and it says no, you move.
No, you move. Yeah, right. That's the line.
So, yeah, it's just one of those really awesome speeches in there because a lot of times the easy thing to do is to go along to get along, which is what we're seeing, in politics right now, where people put all their faith in the so-called squad, thinking that they'll be Captain America, and it turns out they're just regular politicians and going along to get along. When what you really need is people who are willing to buck their own party's leadership. Whether you agree with that as a good idea or not, but have you noticed the leadership of both major political parties? They're not well liked. So there's nothing to be lost by going up against those people. And instead, they've chosen to basically be subsumed by the party machine and be swallowed up by it. So
I think we've had a good little journey.
Yeah,
talking a lot about Zack Snyder selling people on a good comic book. Yeah. Talking about how the MCU is directionless and listless, and
and apparently I'm a hack because I listen to Maggie Mae Fish's videos, even though I don't necessarily agree with everything she says. But she did do a pretty good trilogy of videos focusing on why Zack Snyder may not be the best movie maker for much reasons you pointed out, because he doesn't know how to relate to people.
Mm-hmm.
So
but he's the perfect person to do something like Fountainhead.
Yeah,
you want somebody like Zack Snyder to do Fountainhead because he and Ayn Rand are in sync.
Yeah, he really is such a fanboy of Ayn Rand, or however you pronounce her first name. But a lot of people don't realize Ayn Rand actually worshipped a serial killer. Like she was like a serial killer fangirl back in her youth. Although I think she was old before she was even young. So,
she started a sex cult that had Ben Bernanke in it at one point in time. Not Ben Bernanke.
Alan Greenspan.
The guy before Bernanke, who was the head of the Federal Reserve.
Alan Greenspan.
Yeah, Alan Greenspan was in a sex cult she ran.
That puts an image in my head. I really did not need. I'm gonna have to go bang my head in a refrigerator door. Now that you've put it in there, I've got to get it out somehow.
John Galt was inspired by a man she was having an affair with on her husband and on his wife.
Oh, really?
And she convinced the wife to allow the affair because she needed it to inspire her for the work. And then it continued for another 7 years.
God, please don't make me think about Ayn Rand having sex. No, I can't do it. I'm gonna have to. I need to go.
You live in Cleveland, man, and you've seen a lot of old Russian women. You know that they've all had lots of sex, man. Come on.
I don't know. Have you seen some of the Russian women here in Cleveland? I mean, the younger ones, anyway. I mean,
well, you know, there's a lot of high upside, and then it goes to some downside at the end there.
Oh my god! Yeah, so we need to end this because we've gone on almost 2 hours of this. But yeah, some of the people, and you can tell they don't have an argument when they're reduced to calling me a virgin and a hack, even though.
Oof.
Yeah, it's like, well, you don't understand the word hack. You don't understand the word characterization. Your argument is reduced to you've never had sex before, even though there are at least 11 women who can testify to the opposite of that.
But we hack as an insult, but think about the hacks who wrote novels back in the day.
Oh god, I've read some bad ones.
Right, but those guys do 52 novels a year, and they'd make a decent living doing it. Yeah. So I mean, maybe the hacks do have a point.
When you've got a $300 million riding on it, you might want to go with someone who's not a hack.
Well, but we'll see how that works for the new Superman movie being written by Tom Coates for J.J. Abrams. Yeah, we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, hackster extraordinaire Jar Jar Abrams.
I'm betting they'll probably get Ava DuVernay to direct it.
Oh, God.
That's my prediction. Let's see if something that horrible happens.
How about you get someone who actually likes the original Superman comics? I mean, Richard Donner, like I said, he did such a splendid job along with Mario Puzo because they grew up watching Superman comics. They grew up watching the George Reeves Superman series. They grew up watching the Republic serial. You can tell there's all those influences going in there. And
Kevin Feige calls the Richard Donner Superman movies the template he used when he started to develop the MCU.
Right, and Christopher Nolan likewise for his Batman trilogy.
Yep.
So why they can't keep a formula that works? But anyway, we do need to get going because it's getting past my bedtime. I know it's getting past yours probably, because I got to get up and start work at 7 in the morning. So, yeah. All right. So anyway, is there anything else you want to promote before we head off?
No, that'll do it. And thank you for letting me promote and talk about the Snyder Cut.
Yeah, and yeah, definitely shoot me those links. I'll include them in the description. All right, so anyway, this is Michael Wilk. And Larry?
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to say Michael Wilk
and Larry Bernard from Sarasota, Florida, signing out.
Yeah, signing out. Take care. Good night. If you like what you heard and you want to hear more, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to receive notifications whenever we upload new content. Like this video, share it. If you want to help support the channel, keep the lights on, help us bring you more content, head over to our Patreon or our Ko-fi page. We can't do this without you. Until next time, this is Michael Wilk for The Wilk Report saying take care. Good night. I'm out.